Hi, I'm Mitchell. And they say it's good in a quarantine to do things that kind of maintain a sense of normalcy. So being able to talk for a couple minutes when there's literally no one in the room that's interested in hearing it makes me feel like I'm right back on campus. So thank you all for this opportunity. And I was asked to speak a bit about the Parsha, which was a big deal for me because it meant that for the first time since April, I had a reason to read something that wasn't a Twitter thread. And this week's Parsha, Shelach, starts with one of the same major themes as a lot of Parshas and a lot of Twitter threads, which is that the Jewish people were freaking out. And as always, they had good reason. After escaping slavery in Egypt and crossing the desert, they found themselves right outside of Canaan, the land that would become Israel. So Moses sent 12 spies to check out the land and report back. Well, I'll be honest here, spies was a bit of an oversell. This wasn't Mission Impossible, it was 12 dudes looking at stuff. But when our Tom Cruise Jews returned, that's when the real drama started. 10 out of the 12 of them had pretty negative things to say, saying that the land was impenetrable and that literal giants lived there. And this freaked the Jewish people out. At one point, the text tells us that the entire community raised their voices and shouted, and the people wept. Which, if you've ever been on a Zoom call with more than 4 family members, is an experience that you pretty much get. And even after all they had overcome and the miracles that God had performed for them at every turn, the Jewish people weren't exactly optimistic about the situation. After hearing about the obstacles they were facing, the Jews questioned, "Is it not better for us to return to Egypt?" And the Jews were so ready to give up at the first sign of trouble, which I guess means that when I do that in my own life, it's not because I'm lazy, it's because I'm embracing my heritage. It's like wearing a Star of David or not digesting lactose. But this complaint was actually really important because it was a breaking point for God. He had been hearing the Jews complain ever since he saved them from Egypt, and he had finally had enough. He spoke to Moses and said, "Moses, these people suck." I'm paraphrasing, but the actual dialogue here is a lot worse. God says that he will strike them with a plague and annihilate them. Then he will make Moses into a nation greater and stronger than they. So now Moses finds himself in a position where he has to argue with God for why he shouldn't kill all of the Jews. And, a couple of obvious answers seem to come to mind, right? Killing is wrong and who would write our TV shows? But Moses leads off with something different, basically saying that killing the Jews now, right after saving them, would be a bad look, and that the Egyptians might think less of him for it. But once he moved past the questionable optics of killing all of our ancestors, Moses actually came up with something that was incredibly impactful. He said to God, "As you spoke, the Lord is slow to anger and abundantly kind, forgiving iniquity and transgression." He said, "as you spoke," meaning he's quoting something that God said right back to God. And this is a huge deal. Moses saves our people and invents the clapback, but what I kept thinking of is how it reminds me a whole lot of something that happened with Starbucks last week. And obviously, I'm not comparing Hashem to Starbucks. One is an all-powerful entity that impacts basically every facet of our lives, and the other is the God of the Jewish people. And yes, I'm just kidding, there's no equal footing here. Any God worth praying to would let you say medium and not grande. But there are some genuine parallels between the two situations. Because 2 weeks ago, Starbucks came out and made a statement in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. And they said they were committed to being a part of the change. But then last week, a story broke that said they weren't allowing employees to wear anything that supported Black Lives Matter. And it's easy to see that the situation here was a lot more cynically motivated than what we saw in the Bible. But what happened next is pretty similar. Because the overwhelming response on Twitter was people replying to Starbucks by quoting or screenshotting their own statement they had made just a few days before. And corporate greed aside, you see how something like this could happen. It's easy to say the right thing in the abstract, whether it's Starbucks 2 weeks ago or God saying he was slow to anger when talking to Moses before giving the Jews the 10 Commandments. Saying the right thing in the abstract is nice, but anybody can do it. It doesn't mean much. The real test is acting on it, especially when it isn't the most convenient option. And it's interesting that this is something that God struggled with himself because it's such a human phenomenon. Because if you set aside the incredibly high stakes of these two examples, there's an element to this that we experience constantly in our everyday lives. Like a couple days ago, I woke up exhausted and I was like, all right, that's it. I am done going to sleep at 2 a.m. I will never do it again. And it really did feel true at the time, but then at like 1 a.m., when I was about to get ready for bed, I saw a video on my YouTube recommended of a cat who can play Scrabble. And all that high-minded talk I had when I was tired at 10 felt a lot less significant when I was wide awake at 1 and wanted to see a feline get a triple word score. And in moments like this, when it feels a lot easier to not act, it's so important that we have someone or something that's there to hold us accountable. Whether it's thousands of rightfully angry people on Twitter calling out the hypocrisy of Starbucks, being pulled aside by someone you trust like Moses and reminded of your own values, or just committing to following through on the intentions that you set for yourself. Because in a lot of cases, holding people accountable really works. Starbucks changed their policy. God spared the Jewish people and told Moses he had forgiven them in accordance to his word. And I ended up watching that video the next morning. And let me just say, when I eventually did watch it, it was such a disappointment. And no, this doesn't tie into any of my themes here, and I've been asked repeatedly to remove it, but I just have to get it off my chest. Because they say that the cat can play Scrabble, but what they don't tell you is that he sucks at it. What a waste of a moral quandary. But situations like these do come up, and they're going to continue to. Especially in a quarantine when it can be so easy to feel isolated or disconnected. We owe it to ourselves and to each other to hold one another accountable to actually acting to create the positive change we say we want, whether it's changing the world or just changing our sleep schedule. Thank you.